Good morning. So thanks for coming, everybody. My name is John Healy. I'm the lead engineer for LeafLink. And today, I'm just going to tell you a bit about what I've learned over the years about how to hire, identify, train, and grow junior developers. Hopefully, this talk can address kind of two different sides of people who might be in the room. One would be people who are looking to hire these types of people. And the other would be people who would like to become junior developers. So do I have anybody on either side there? Good, perfect. So I'm going to kind of go back and forth throughout the talk, just kind of intermingling both sides, because it's important that both sides kind of work together in order for a junior developer hire to be successful. So you'll see me going kind of back and forth between the hiring perspective versus the junior developer perspective. So with that, let's begin. So I'm going to quickly talk about just the criteria that you might see for a typical desired candidate, which I'm sure everybody will be somewhat familiar with. And then we'll move on to which qualities are actually important. So oftentimes these things don't line up, and perhaps if you're somebody who has been looking for a software development job, you might have been frustrated by interview processes or being asked to demonstrate skills that are not necessarily the ones that you're going to be using on the job. After that, we'll talk about how that relationship can grow. So from a hiring side, how you would engage the junior developer, which includes compensation and structure, but also training and the process of working with that person. And then finally, I'll end with a couple of case studies, people who I've worked with who kind of demonstrate some of what we've talked about. So stop me if you've seen this first one before. A recent on-time college grad or somebody with 2, 5, or 10 years experience in a job posting. I'm sure you've seen this pretty often, just kind of from the perspective of an HR department. When you're writing up a job post, you have to put some criteria in there. And here's one that you see a lot. Turns out that most of the time, sometimes the language you're working in hasn't even been around for this many years. So it's kind of a throwaway. But you see it a lot. Similarly, cracking the coding interview is almost a trope at this point, where if you go into a larger company standard interview process, they'll ask you to do a certain set of questions that are mostly based in computer science fundamentals and often have nothing to do with what you would ever be doing on a day-to-day basis. And then these other points are things that I've experienced as I got deeper into interview processes and started to work with recruiters on both sides, both to get my own job and to try to source candidates. The point about medium to large companies with few job changes, there's a little bit of insecurity often about people who move from job to job. This is something that comes up a lot of times when people at a large company will look at a resume and see job changes and kind of disqualify people for that. And similarly, no consultants is something I've heard a few times. Companies that want to hire full-time that are worried about people being consultants. And culture fit. I don't know if you guys have heard this before, but culture fit is something that comes up both in job posts and in interview processes as a reason for hiring or not hiring fairly often. Unfortunately, a lot of what goes into culture fit is not only not necessarily what you're looking for, what you care about, but also can be discriminatory, illegal. There's a lot of examples. I've got a link here. Highly recommend reading about why culture fit is something that could be detrimental to your company. Nevertheless, something that a lot of people and large companies, even medium-sized startups, tend to look for. So why is it that we need to use different criteria? The main reason is that it's hard to find these people. If you are a hiring company and you're looking to grow a dev team and you are not Google or Facebook or Microsoft or somebody like that, you'll often have trouble finding and competing effectively for the small group of people that meet the criteria that we just went through. Good news is it doesn't really matter if you are a computer science degree holder or if you have a deep understanding of fundamentals to be a junior developer at many companies that do work in web frameworks or on an app or a mobile app, for example. That's what these frameworks are good for. Django, Flask, Tornado, even Rails. These are things that let you do business problems, let you work on business problems without thinking about the low-level details. And what that means is you don't have to think nearly as much about computational efficiency, for example. Not to say that those things don't come up, because they certainly do, but you'll have experience working in it by then. Excuse me. You'll have senior developers on the team who can help you through those things. It's just a much easier way to jump in. And it turns out that going back up the page a little bit, most of the skills that you need are not the ones tested for. They're slightly different. And these are what I think the skills are. If I had to list them out into three major categories. So the first one, is the person, the candidate, a creator? Second one, can the candidate learn from the internet on their own? And third, does the candidate think from the user's perspective? And here's a list of things that doesn't matter. Gaps in your resume, doesn't really matter. Which boot camp, college, the language. The language matters a little bit because syntactically some languages are different from others, and if somebody is relatively new and has worked in Python-like syntax, then Ruby-like syntax might be a little bit harder, or something that is strongly typed might be a little bit confusing at first. But for the most part, if you know how to do loops and ifs and basic flow, it doesn't really matter what language you've worked in the past. And finally, things like reversing a linked list. It doesn't matter if you know how to reverse a linked list. This has never come up in my career. I've never had to do it. I don't know if any of you have ever had to do it. Maybe you have. And if I ever did have to do it, even though I have a little bit of CS background, I'm still going to look on Stack Overflow for the best way. So creativity. The question that I ask is, what role did you have on the project? And this is a very general question that almost anybody coming in for an interview could answer. Here are some good possible answers. I built the module to handle some tasks. I designed the product, merged the code, put it on the App Store. I put together the front end and helped the back-end engineer connect it. Anything that's kind of an in-depth answer that indicates that the candidate actively worked on the code, actively worked on the creative portion of the project is what you're looking for. And it's really important that you dig on this question. And if you are on the interviewee side, that you take the time to go through the process of creating something, because that's what you're going to be doing. When you get to your new job as a junior developer, you're going to be creating things over and over and over, and that is really where your skill needs to be. And it's important to note that and I say dig, but we're digging into a thing that is going to make somebody who is a creator comfortable, because they're going to get to talk about a thing that they have successfully done. So as you dig here, you're going to take somebody who might have been nervous, which is a really strong source of noise in an interview process, and you're going to help them calm down and show what they're capable of. So next is learning from the internet, self-directed learning. I've listed out here a bunch of questions that a junior developer might ask themselves on a given day. So I'm not going to go through all of them, but you can kind of read through some examples here. How do I undo a commit? I don't understand what a request is. Where am I supposed to put this code? These are all the types of things that if you're working in a framework or in a language that's pretty well known or has any kind of community, these questions are available on the internet pretty quickly to answer. And as you're going through your day-to-day work, you might ask yourself these questions 20 times a day. So a really important trait is that somebody who is working as a junior developer is capable of finding the answers to these on their own. And that's not to say that we shouldn't train them, because I'm going to get to that. But they need to be able to figure these out because this is the work. This is what we are hiring to do. Finally, user perspective. A lot of large company developers, people who have been career developers at large companies, tend to not really have this perspective. And often that's because they have worked in environments where they've been provided with a specification, a list of requirements, and they have generated that, spit it out through some sort of process, and that's their role. But when you're talking about a smaller company or a startup or even a medium-sized team, it's so important that the developer is thinking about the user as they are doing their work. So, for example, you might find someone technically minded who really wants to create a shiny interface in a new front-end framework because they want to learn the framework and it's really cool and it's the flavor of the month. But the reason that I want my developers to learn this framework and build it is because the users do that thousands of times a day. And if we use the new framework and we build an interface in it, it's going to make things easier for them. So when you found somebody like this, somebody who is creative, someone who can learn from the internet, someone who thinks from the user's perspective, how do you get started with that relationship? I recommend contracting for a few reasons. For one, it is really easy to figure out what the person should be paid, what they're worth as far as how valuable their time is at a given point. And one thing that I've found is that it often improves really quickly. So if you know, for example, that 5 hours of the junior developer's time is about equivalent to what you could do in 1 hour, you have a very easy rate calculation on your hands. And when that goes to 2 hours to 1 hour, you know what they're worth at that point too. And it's really easy to say, okay, well, let's bring your rate up. Of course, I realize that a lot of people are not comfortable with contracting. Maybe it's not committal enough, or from the hiring side, your big company doesn't like when you do this. So if you are going to do full-time, you really have to build in kind of early touch points. I say yes or no to really figure out if the relationship is working. And that goes both ways, really. Because the junior developer has to be really comfortable that they are learning, that they are capable of contributing to this code base, that the environment is going to support them. And on your side, you have to, as a hiring person, you have to know that this person is making progress, this person is improving and getting comfortable with the code base. And you really have to both commit to moving up or ending the relationship quickly. So a bit about training. You do need to do this. If you're somebody who's looking to be hired, you should, in fact, expect that your hiring company is going to train you. I think that a lot of companies are reluctant to do this for a number of reasons, but you have to. A junior developer is not going to be successful if you just leave them alone and let them figure things out. So I like to say that I budget 25% of my time towards training a junior developer when somebody is hired. So that could, if you're in a larger team, really some person an individual should be responsible for this. Some ways that you can train people, pair programming is really good to kind of get comfortable with their process and kind of teach some of your process to the junior developer as they're working on a simple task. Giving them rapid feedback is really important. So, you don't want to give the person a ticket, have them submit the ticket a day later, and then let it sit a week before you review it. Because that person has just gotten there. They're doing things very quickly. They need to hear from their manager, their senior developer, whoever it is, what they're doing well and what they can improve on pretty consistently. And attention and presence is really important. A lot of people probably have a little bit of resentment for, hey, I've got to go do my work and I need to put my head down and I don't have time to help. And you do have time to help. It's your job to help if you are a manager, and you should really have that expectation and really commit to it, and that's going to make the relationship a lot better. Some other points here. Debugging. Debugging is really important. Nobody taught me to debug. I don't remember when I learned how to debug, but it was at least 3 years after the first time I used Python that I learned this command right here. I wish somebody had taught me in college that one command and how to use it. But the important thing, teach them how to debug. They've also probably come in with their own way of debugging, print statements, for example. Learn what they're doing, work with them on it, teach them yours. And then the other point here is looking through the code base. So grep to look through the existing code, because a lot of times when you're on a large project, your existing code has examples that are very similar to the thing that is being built if it's a new feature. And often also you have helper functions. In Django you might have model managers that form and encapsulate a logical component, and you want to reuse that component because otherwise you're writing code twice, which could introduce errors. So it's really important that the junior developer knows how to look through code. Finally, once you've hired the junior developer and you're working with them, if you are on the hiring side, your responsibility is to build a culture that is the one you want it to have. So that means that your culture needs to encourage these traits, the ones that you hired for, and really support people as they figure things out. Encourage them. Don't allow people who think they know the answer all the time to remain a part of your team. Those people are not going to help junior developers get better. They're just going to put them down or otherwise, work around them. You don't want these people. You want a supportive culture. Just going to wrap up with 2 quick case studies here. So Meredith worked with me when I was a contractor. We had an agency. We're a couple of partners, and then we eventually hired some junior developers. She took 2 years off college and graduated with a degree in sociology. So this is not a CS major, anything like that. And she came to my attention as she was about to start a boot camp program. And she told me, hey, I'm going to go here to learn Python. And I said, oh, well, I'll pay you $25 an hour, learn Python with me, and work on my projects. So that was good. It didn't take very long for that to go up a bunch. By the time she left, it was $125 an hour, which was my rate at the time. So at the time, I felt that, selling projects, I felt that this person had the same level of skill that I did to fulfill the project. And after 2 years, she decided she wanted to go to a boot camp anyway and move over to front end. So she went to Grace Hopper, and now has a full-time job at, I believe, an ad agency type company in New York. She's very successful. We're still friends. Definitely a success story. Sad that she's not here today. Second case study, Cosimo. He is a junior developer at LeafLink, which is my current company. And out of college, he had 2 jobs, including one of his own startup. And his experience was mostly in front end and JavaScript. And he had a little bit of experience working with the REST frameworks type things that feed the JavaScript, but for the most part, he was a front end engineer. But we also needed some front end engineers, even though we were mostly a Python shop. We did need to move some things into Vue.js. So we figured, hire him and give him some Vue.js stuff to work on, which he had never done before. And of course, a couple months later, he knows more about Vue.js than any of us do. He's definitely our resident expert on it. He maintains a couple of pretty nice interfaces within our tool that, really none of the other people at our company would have had the time to work on. So he took that on. And he's also starting to contribute to the Python side as well, particularly on the API. Yep, that's all I've got. Any questions? Yeah.
So my company is cost conscious, and you're hiring a lot of junior developers remotely. Do you have any experience in how to sort of effectively bring people up to speed who can't sit next to you?
Yeah, the question was, do I have experience bringing remote developers up to speed? When I was a contractor, we did that pretty often using Odesk, which is now Upwork. We hired mostly individuals from around the world. And I think it is much easier to find good people than to try to bring anybody randomly up to speed when it comes to external outsourced developers. So when I was working as a consultant, a lot of our focus was around identifying the right people. And really, it was a lot of similar traits with an additional that they need to be able to communicate well in English over, it could be a pretty difficult connection. But aside from that, I would say identify the same 3 traits, make sure you're talking to them morning and evening mostly, whatever the time zones are. And aside from that, they're like anybody else. Yeah.
How do we get the interviewers to see your presentation?
Sorry?
How do we get the interviewers to see your presentation? I mean, that's all good. I agree with you, but how do we will still be interviewing in places that generally follow that pattern? How do we figure out what to do about that as an interviewee?
Sure. The question is, as an interviewee, how do you figure out what to do about the difficult questions that don't line up with your job necessarily? I would suggest interviewing with different companies. Smaller companies are really good. Really, you need to go to, as a junior developer, you need to be going to places that need your skills. And a lot of times those are the smaller companies. It could be the startups. It could be, companies that need to hire a lot of developers but don't have the cloud of Google. You can't really force Google to change their interview process. And this presentation is not really about how to master the coding interview. So I would recommend going to different companies, really trying to engage somebody higher up, a founder type person, as in a conversation about how you can be helpful to them. Yeah.
Thanks very much. This is a great presentation. Are you familiar with any materials that consolidate or synthesize the subject? I've seen 1 or 2 presentations like this, and I'm wondering if there's anything like a code of conduct, not a legal contract, but something that both the junior dev and their manager can use to hold themselves accountable for ways in which they want to be treating each other like over time. Because a 30-minute presentation, you might not even get folks to be able to watch. I'm just looking to capture this communication in a way that's a little bit more formal.
So the question is there some sort of unified code around formalizing this that people could decide to adhere to as a company or as a junior developer. Not that I know of. I think that's a really, really good idea, and I would love to see some sort of open source contract style thing that would encapsulate some of this as saying like, hey, we're a company that is going to hire on these principles, and we're going to look for people and treat people this way. I think that would be a really great thing to exist, but I don't know of one that does. Yeah.
Are you starting to see more extended interviews in the form of internships?
Question is, are we starting to see extended interviews in the form of internships? It's not something that I do. I much prefer a contract because if you're contributing something valuable, then you should be paid for it. And if you're not, then you shouldn't be working. Paid internship. I haven't seen that. I could understand why people might do that. Again, I think I would say, from my side, I prefer contracting, and I've heard that I've found people to be more receptive to it than they used to be. Maybe internships, extended internships are sort of the same thing in that it provides an evaluation period. And to that extent, I think that a mutual evaluation period is beneficial to both sides. It's just important to make sure that there is an end goal of this person's going to get better, grow with the company, and we're going to compensate the person accordingly. I think I have time for one more, if there are any more. Great. Thanks for coming, everybody.